In order to rest from the fatigue of that day's outing, the prince lay down on his jeweled bed. A group of beautiful court ladies tried to comfort the prince by singing and dancing in step with the music. The exquisite quality of their performance and the gracefulness of their forms reminded one of celestial maidens. But now there was no way that even their skillful dancing and singing could affect the mind of the serene prince, who before he knew it fell into a deep slumber. The court ladies saw this and lost their enthusiasm for dancing and singing. They stopped the music and went to sleep themselves. Only the flame of the scented perfume flickered playfully in the hushed night. The prince suddenly awoke from his slumber, sat up in bed, and surveyed the scene surrounding him. The night was calm, the palace was beautiful, and the incense light exuded a pleasant fragrance. But how loathsome the sleeping dancing girls appeared. Spittle dribbled from their mouths, they gnashed their teeth and mumbled in their sleep. Their clothes and bodies were in disarray, and they were oblivious to their propriety as women. In groups of 2 or 3, they were in deep sleep. Indeed, the palace that had sparkled in the afternoon had turned into a graveyard. The prince shuddered in disgust and stood up. In his heart, he cried out,
"All things are like this scene. In no way can I bear this."
He made up his mind to flee the palace at once. He quietly left his room and moved toward the palace gate. He called for his charioteer, Channa, and ordered him to saddle his horse. He then returned once again to the sleeping quarters of the princess and gently opened the door. In the room, scented lamps cast pale shadows in the deep of the night, and there was only the quiet breathing of someone in deep slumber. He thought,
"If I hug my child and grieve over this final parting, the princess will awaken and try to prevent my leaving home. Instead of doing this, it would be wiser to see this child after I attain enlightenment."
Leaving the palace and mounting his gallant steed Kanthaka, he hurried to the great outer gate of the city. As a precaution against the prince's leaving home, the king had stationed a large number of soldiers at this gate and ordered them to guard it. In addition, the 2 iron gates were constructed in such a way that even the strength of 1,000 men could open them only with great difficulty. But perhaps owing to the agency of divine beings, the guards mysteriously fell asleep, and even those great iron gates swung open without a sound. The white steed Kanthaka ran through the gate like a gust of wind. The time was midnight on the day of the full moon of the 4th month. At this time, King Mara appeared in the sky and shouted,
"O Prince, give up your unwise intent of leaving home and go back to the palace abloom with flowers. If you do so, within 7 days you will become a universal king who rules the 4 directions."
The prince replied,
"O King Mara, away with you. Evil demon, begone with you. Sovereignty over this world is not my goal. My only aspiration is to attain the path."
When the prince rebuffed him with these words, King Mara quietly faded in dejection. But he thought to himself,
"Now or later, the bird of hatred will someday build a nest in the prince's heart. At that time, I will seize my chance."
And from that day, like a shadow that follows a body, he stuck by the prince's side and did his best to obstruct his enlightenment. The prince, who had left the palace resolutely, thought that he would like to take one last, lingering look at his city, which was gradually fading into the distance. He admonished himself, however, and pressed on. Because of the ferocity of the struggle within his mind, the great earth mysteriously spun around like a potter's wheel and the city appeared of itself in his mind's eye. But with renewed determination, he rode on at full gallop. After riding for 7 miles, he reached the banks of the river Anoma at dawn. Urging himself onward, he flew over the river with a single bound. He lowered himself onto the sand that was beginning to shine brightly, glittering in the morning sun. The prince took off his clothes and gave them to Channa and said,
"O Channa, some people serve with their minds but not with their bodies, while others serve with their bodies but not with their minds. You have served me with your body as well as your mind. People fight with each other to serve those of high status who abound in wealth, but they shun those who are poor and of low birth. You alone, however, abandoned your own country and followed me over long distances to this place. Your action is truly admirable."
Unraveling his topknot, the prince held out a gem and said,
"Channa, go back now to the palace and offer this to the great king. Convey these words to him. The prince wants nothing of the things of the world. People are all fettered by emotions of love and affection, but in the end they are unable to elude old age, illness, and death. Please ponder over this truth and do away with affliction. While the prince has not attained enlightenment, he will not return to the palace."
Then he unfastened a necklace, handed it to Channa, and said,
"Please offer this to the Queen Foster Mother and say to her that desire is the root of suffering and that I have resolved to sever the root of suffering and to do away with affliction."
Again, he handed over a variety of other bodily ornaments and said,
"Please offer these to the princess and relate to her that in the world of men, without fail, there is the sorrow of separation, and that the prince has resolved to cut off the root of that sorrow. If she is cast down by the emotion of loving attachment, tell her that she must not sink down into affliction."
Channa broke down and wept and pleaded to be allowed to become a mendicant together with the prince, but he was not allowed to do so. Channa then cried out in a loud voice. The steed Kanthaka followed by bending his forelegs and licking the prince's feet while whining sadly. The prince stroked Kanthaka's head and consoled him with these words.
"O Kanthaka, you have accomplished everything that you were called upon to do. There is no reason at all for you to feel sad."
He drew out his sword with his right hand, and with his left hand he took hold of his hair, and cut it off. He then flung the hair into the air, exclaiming,
"If I am able to attain true enlightenment, let this hair remain suspended in the sky. If I am unable to do so, let it fall to the ground."
The hair remained suspended in the sky and did not fall. The divinity Indra caught the hair in a jeweled vessel and placed it in the tabletums of heaven. The prince dressed himself in the 3 garments presented to him by the child of a divinity named Gatikara, and holding a bowl in his hand calmly began to walk forth. In tears, Channa bade farewell to the prince as he faded into the distance. With a heavy heart, Channa returned to the palace. Although he incurred the anger of the whole clan, especially that of the great king Suddhodana and of Princess Yasodhara, Channa faithfully relayed the prince's words. The prince had now become a humble mendicant. He felt reborn in both mind and body, and with bowl in hand he begged for food at neighboring houses. But at first the prince, who had feasted on lavish meals at the palace, was unable to eat the sour food that he had managed to collect. He went to a spot under a tree and tried to eat but hesitated. Without thinking, he was about to throw the food away, but suddenly struck by the thought that he was now a mendicant who seeks the path, he partook of that food with good grace. From that moment on, throughout his life, the prince never suffered over food. The prince then entered Vesali and visited the ascetic Bhagava to observe the practices of his followers. He observed that they dressed themselves in robes made of leaves and bark of trees and ate tree roots and fruits. At times they ate once a day, at other times, they ate once every 2 or 3 days. They worshipped fire and water and lay down in alleyways. The ascetic expounded on the benefits of mortification. He claimed,
"Through these practices, in the future, you will be born in the celestial realms."
But the prince pressed him with questions such as, the ascetic Bhagava was not able to respond in a satisfactory manner. The prince then thought,
"Traders seek treasures and dive into the sea. Kings seek more territories and make war against other countries. These ascetics seek celestial worlds and undergo ascetic practices."
In this way the questions and answers continued until nightfall. The prince passed the night there, but he became convinced that these practices were not the true way. The following day he took his leave, and crossing the Ganges, toward the south, he moved toward the neighborhood of Rajagaha. He then visited an ascetic named Alara Kalama, who lived on Mount Sumeru, and asked about the path.
"O Kalama, I wish to practice under your teaching."
The ascetic answered,
"Stay here with me as you wish. This teaching can be attained by anyone in a short time."
The prince quickly mastered the teaching. The prince thought,
When Kalama himself claims that he has attained this teaching, he does not merely believe he has done so, he has no doubt that he has fully realized the teaching.
Thinking this, the prince asked,
"Kalama, what is the nature of your enlightenment?"
Kalama answered by speaking on the state of infinite nothingness.
In the state of infinite nothingness, thoughts of material things are transcended and all existing things are void. This state is the meditative state in which one realizes that only the void exists in infinite nothingness.
The prince thought to himself,
Ilera Kalama is not the only one who has faith. I also have faith. Not only he, but I, too, possess exertion, right mindfulness, meditation, and wisdom. I shall strive to attain that teaching that, it is said, he has attained.
Before long, the prince attained that teaching and went before Kalama and said,
Kalama, is this the extent of the teaching that you claim to have attained?
This is the extent,
answered Kalama. The prince said,
I, too, have attained this teaching.
Kalama said,
Friend, I am fortunate indeed to have gained a fellow student like you. The teaching that I have realized, you have also realized. The teaching that you have attained, I also have attained. You and I have attained the same state. Let us, therefore, together guide the disciples.
But the prince thought,
This teaching does not lead to release from delusion. This is not a true and enlightened teaching that is free of greed. Through this teaching one merely attains a state called infinite nothingness.
unfulfilled by this teaching, the prince searched anew for the good. Then, seeking the path that leads to peace, he went to Uddaka Ramapada and practiced his teaching. There the prince attained Uddaka's teaching. He discovered that Uddaka's teaching merely led to the realization of a kind of meditative state in which there was neither consciousness nor unconsciousness. He thought,
This teaching also does not lead to release from delusion. This is not a true and enlightened teaching that is free of greed.
He thought that if the state of neither consciousness nor unconsciousness were devoid of ego, then even the term neither consciousness nor unconsciousness rightfully should not exist. If, on the other hand, there were an ego, then inevitably there must be consciousness. If there were consciousness and one were to become entangled in worldly connections, then attachment would arise. Thinking that this could not be regarded as release, he left Uddaka and once again set out on the road to seek the good. Spurring himself on this road, the prince entered Rajagraha and went from place to place begging for his food. The people of the city noticed the prince's noble appearance and fought with each other to walk behind him. Because of the commotion, King Bimbisara finally became alarmed. Ascending his palace tower, he saw the prince's majestic appearance in the distance. He followed after the prince in his carriage until he came to the Pandava hill outside the city. After an exchange of greetings, the king said,
Although you are a mendicant, you are still young. You appear to be a prince of noble birth. If you have the ambition to rule, I would not regret dividing the country in two and offering you half.
The prince answered,
I am a prince of the Sakaya clan that dwells in the foothills of the Himalayas. Realizing that greed is the root of suffering, I have abandoned all greed and now aspire for the peace of Nirvana. That is the only thing I seek.
The king was profoundly moved by the prince's noble mind and said,
If you attain enlightenment, I should like to be the first to be saved by you.
The prince silently accepted the king's entreaty and departed. He traveled in a southwesterly direction, crossed the river Narendra, and entered the quiet forest of Uruvala. This lush and beautifully green forest, situated near the river Narendra with its shores of pure white sand, became the site for a 6-year period of the prince's practice of the Bodhisattva path. Shortly after the prince entered the path of the mendicant, his father, King Suddhodana, chose 5 men, Khandana and 4 others belonging to the Sakaya clan, and had them follow after the prince. While doing so, they eventually joined the prince and began to undergo spiritual exercises themselves.